All right, you guys, welcome back to Rad JBI. My name is JB. Today, Ant and I are doing another suspension
versus chassis episode. We are following up episode 5, all about the rebound clicker, how it functions, how it works. Episode 6 is going to be about suspension valving. We're going to dive into real world examples of how valving works, the different types of valving that we offer here at Ride JBI. And that's about it.
The primary function of suspension is absorbing the bumps in the terrain and cushion the jump landing. A bump can be dirt, rock, root, or really any irregularity in the ground that you may come across while riding. I share this with you because this is applicable for all different types of riding, whether it's the various types of off-road riding, motocross, supercross, arena cross, or even freestyle motocross. And why don't you break down what the primary function of the motorcycle chassis is?
The primary function of the motorcycle's chassis is going to be the handling characteristics of the motorcycle. So think of turning ability, straight line stability, and last but not least, the rider triangle or ergonomics of the motorcycle. So that being the handlebar to seat ratio, seat to foot peg ratio, and everything in between.
In the past videos, what we've been doing is explaining what different changes do to the bike and how much it influences, possibly influencing just the suspension, just the chassis, or if it influences both. With this video being primarily based about suspension valving, I think you can logically deduce that the changes to valving primarily has a influence over the suspension, so meaning how the bike feels as you ride. But when you go to the extremes end of the valving and or setups, it definitely can influence chassis some more as well. But again, the primary influence that valving has is over the actual suspension's feel and comfort as you ride. Why don't you break down the different types of valving that we offer at Ride JBI?
I'm glad you brought that up, JB, because a common question we get here at the shop is, what's the best type of setup for me? Now, Ride JBI is very well versed in all the different types of off-road riding, whether it's supercross, motocross, arena cross, freestyle motocross, technical single track, Baja, or anything in between. The style of suspension valving that is best for you is going to be the type of terrain that you're most encompassing. So where you're located also has a huge influence over that as well. The discipline of riding that you are participating in, the year, make, and model bike that you are riding on, and also your riding ability has a huge influence over what type of suspension valving best suits you. Now, again, each JBI spec valving that we have or offer here at the shop is going to be uniquely tuned and specified for you. So we don't just have a base setting that we give out to everyone. We like to take in all the information that we can and then take our JBI motocross setting, for example, and then further tailor it to, again, the year, make, model bike and the rider as well. Up on your screen now is going to be the JBI suspension revalve scale. Now this has all the JBI spec valving that we offer, all the way from the softest setting, which is technical single track, all the way to the stiffest setting, which is God mode, and everything in between. Now, to easily identify each valving, we also correlated it to a symbol as well. For reference, the Pro Motocross, Motocross, and Pro Off-Road is a yellow triangle. Our stiffest settings, that is SoCal Hills, FMX, Supercross/Arena Cross, and God Mode, have the red triangle. And it goes on from there. If you also go to our website, ridejbi.com, up on the left-hand side of your screen, which is the categories tab, you'll see a tab called JBI Spec Valving. And each valving has its own product page. You can go ahead and click on that. It gives you further info into what we do here at the shop. Over time, it's going to have photos, videos of the style of riding that you're interested in or select on. So for instance, if you click on technical single track, it'll have technical single track riding. Motocross will have motocross riding and everything in between.
Dude, well summarized in verse. And I'm really pumped that you came up with the symbols for our different types of settings that we offer. The reason that we offer different valving settings is because if you were limited to only adjusting the clickers on the suspension, and even just the spring rates, there's only so much that you can accomplish. To kind of put like a quantitative number on it, with your clicker going all the way into the stiffest setting and maybe all the way out to the softest setting, I'd say you can maybe make like a 10% overall change in terms of compression or rebound damping. Internally, we can do anything from a 1% change to like 1,000% change. So that's why we have different valving specs, because even if we take, let's say, our flowy single track off-road setting, and we adjust it to the softest setting per our JBI suspension settings guide, it'll definitely be softer, but it's not going to be as soft as our hard enduro or technical single track setting. In order to achieve a softness of that level, we just have to utilize different shim stacks internally, and oftentimes different spring rates, oil volumes, and other items as well to further achieve that. When it comes to us valving suspension, we've learned a few things. One is the more effort that we put up front initially, and part of that can be us sharing with you how we articulate suspension, how we describe it, and then the information we can get from you, as Anthony talked about, the type of riding that you're doing, where you're located, what your suspension preference is, meaning how stiff, soft, or plush you may like it. The much higher the probability you're going to get a JBI spec suspension setup from us and be really pumped with the performance and settings of it, and then find that your initial base setting is much better overall. So meaning smoother over the small and medium bumps, better hold up during aggressive riding, and better bottoming resistance for high impacts and jump landings. So it'll be better overall baseline setting, and that'll allow you to further fine tune the suspension via the clickers even more to your own specific preference. So now that we've kind of covered the different styles of valving that we offer, why we offer it, what the limitations are on some of it, we're going to go ahead and we're going to show you some of the internals of both forks and shocks and show the different types of valves that are inside the suspension. Inside of the fork, we most commonly find 3 different valving setups. And when I say valving, we can also substitute this as shim stack setups as well. In forks, we're always going to find what's called a base valve shim stack that handles the majority of your compression damping. You're going to find a mid valve rebound shim stack that handles the majority of your rebound damping. And then you'll find a mid valve compression shim stack, and that provides the majority of your mid to high speed compression damping depending upon the setting or how it is configured. And then in certain forks, you may find what's called a sub-valve shim stack as well. And this complements and works in conjunction with the base valve compression shim stack for it. And so what we'll do shortly afterwards is we'll show you some different internals of like a KYB fork, a WP, and a Showa, so you guys can get a good visual on exactly what these items look like. To the left of me, I have the WP cone valve, aka the WP7548 Exact Pro internals. And what I'm going to show you guys are the 3 different valves that we talked about earlier: the base valve compression, mid valve compression, and mid valve rebound as well, and show you how those valves function and also interact with the clickers as well. So this is called the base valve compression piston. On what I call the backside of it is what we call the base valve shim stack. On the opposite side is going to be our rebound check plate. Now what we can't see, but I've laid out here, is the top of this, and this is your compression clicker. So when you adjust your compression clicker, we are interacting with our base valve assembly. Now again, this is our base valve piston. During the compression stroke, so when your fork compresses downwards, oil is going to flow this way through it, and it's going to want to bend open the shim stack that's here. Now I'm going to give you a better idea of how that exactly works. This is that piston with nothing on it, and we can see 3 ports here is where the oil is going to flow through. As we see assembled over here, these 3 ports are covered with a shim. So I'm going to put a shim over this. I'm going to flip it over this way so that way you guys can see. So what the oil sees is it sees an entrance right here, here, and here. Now, typically people like to think of suspension as like a continuous fluid flowing, as if it's like a river of oil flowing at all times. That's not the case. A more intuitive sense way to think of it is when the fork is at rest, so imagine flying through the air and you're getting ready to land, the oil is applying pressure on the areas of the shim that we can see. And when you land, the pressure generates so high, it's going to apply enough pressure to bend this shim open. I'm going to turn it like this. So as I push, this shim is going to deflect open and allow oil to bypass around it. Now that pressure is going to be equal on all 3 ports that the oil applies pressure to for it. So again, it's going to flow this direction and bend open our shim stack. Now this is an exaggeration. Likely the shim stack does not open that far unless it's very high impact types of hits. Now I just have 1 shim on top of this right now. As you can see over here, we have multiple shims laid out and in a tapered shim stack as well, such as it kind of mimics a triangle, if you will. Depending on the amount of shims that we use, the taper design, and a few other key aspects, such as like the last shim, we call that the pivot shim, that has a big influence over how hard it is for this shim to bend. To oversimplify, the more shims we have, the more effort or pressure it's going to take to bend the shim stack back. The less shims we have, the easier it is going to be for the shim to deflect open and allow oil to pass. Now, again, this is how the WP cone valve fork, and this is what we call the base compression piston. And this has the majority influence over your compression damping. And again, the way we interact with that is with our compression clicker and with the shim stack over there. In stock form, this fork does not have what's called a sub valve inside of it, or low speed valve, with the exception of the 2023 and newer WP Gen 3 cone valve forks. At Rad JBI, we've developed our own sub valve so we can implement that technology into all of the older forks, and also the WP Exact Pro 6500 and Explorer Pro 6500, because those damping systems or cartridges utilize the same exact compression assembly that we see laid out here. Now let's shift gears and turn our attention to the mid-valve assembly. This is the mid-valve assembly out of the WP cone valve fork, again, aka the 7548 Exact Pro. What makes it the cone valve is the assembly that we see here at the bottom. Right here, this darker gray piece is what we'd call the mid-valve piston. Below that, the more of the bronze color is what we call the cone adapter. And then the red piece we can barely see is the cone itself. We can better view it over here. And then we have what's called the cone spring underneath it. So it's similar to how what we showed on the base valve, how the shim deflects or bends out of the way. What's going to happen here as the oil flows this direction, it's going to enter through this port, this one, or this one, which you can't see. It has three options, and they line up with these. It's going to apply pressure and push down on our cone and compress this spring, allowing the oil to flow around the cone assembly. With these, the way we can tune it is we have different tapers of cones, and that'll dictate how stiff or soft it feels. We also have different spring rates. We can go with softer springs to allow this to compress very easily, or we have stiffer springs that take much more effort in order to compress this. Now, on the other side of our mid piston, we have what's called our rebound shim stack. And this primarily does the majority of our rebound damping. As you can see, it's still a shim stack style. The only cone piece inside the cone fork is the mid-valve section. It's often misunderstood that the cone valve fork doesn't have any shims. That's not true. Only one part of the fork features a cone system. This one's unique as it uses what we call a delta shim style system for the rebound shims. But we'll talk about that in another video. Before I get too far ahead of myself, go back one episode to our rebound episode if you want to get more an intuitive sense of how the rebound clicker works. When it comes to setups and valving, with these forks, again, we can change out the cones, or we can also alter the shim stack on here. With this, we can either reduce or increase the amount of rebound damping resistance we have. Typically, the amount of rebound damping we do is going to be a function of the spring rate. The stiffer spring you have, the more rebound damping resistance we're going to have. The softer spring rate we have, the less rebound damping resistance we're going to have. Again, here we just already talked about the different cone systems that we can use in order to make this fork stiffer or softer. Now, earlier I said that our base valve assembly does the majority of our compression damping. Our mid-valve compression, that's going to be everything below here, that provides our mid to high speed damping, but it can also provide some low speed damping depending on the configuration of how it is set up. I'm going to oversimplify for you, but typically the mid-valve compression, this side is what provides the majority of the speed sensitive damping, what we call speed sensitive damping inside of a fork. The stiffer we set up the mid-valve compression, the sooner this is going to provide compression damping. By sooner, I don't mean earlier into the travel, I mean at low speeds. So if you're riding over some relatively flat ground with small bumps, the fork is not compressing very quickly. But if you have a very stiff setting, this is going to contribute damping very quickly. If you have a very soft setting, then it's not going to contribute damping very quickly. It's going to require that the fork compresses this way at a very high speed in order for it to help slow the fork down. The WP Exact Pro 6500 and WP Explorer Pro 6500 are relatively the same mid-valve assembly that we see here. The key difference is instead of the cone valve system, there are shims installed here instead. We have a video from just over a year ago where we compare the 3 different types of mid-valves that you can find inside of a WP fork. Check that one out if you want to do a deeper dive on the style of mid-valves we can build these WP forks too. So now that we've covered the WP brand, let's take a look at what Showa and KYB have to offer in a similar style twin chamber closed cartridge fork. So far we've covered the WP Exact Pro 7548, aka cone valve internals. By that I mean the base compression assembly and also the mid-valve assembly. Now we're going to shift our focus to the KYB and Showa versions of the closed cartridge, aka twin chamber fork. And while we do that, I have 3 assemblies to the left of me, one of them being the WP, which you've already seen. I wanted to leave that in there so you can see that in comparison to the KYB SSS base valve assembly, also called the AOS fork. And that is next to the Showa 49mm twin chamber fork. That is the newest fork that's been out about since 2017, originally debuted on the Honda CRF 450R. So first, a little comparison on the different sizes, and then we'll go into some more of the details specific to the KYB and specific to the Showa. On my very left is the WP base valve compression assembly, which we already covered. And then in the middle is the KYB compression assembly. And then on the very right is the Showa compression assembly. I laid them out in order, going from the smallest diameter of base piston to the largest diameter of base piston. Now, bigger isn't always better, but for your mom it is. Bigger isn't always better, but there's going to be some trade-offs depending on the size of the base valve compression piston that you use. But again, I just want to give you guys an intuitive visualization on what the 3 look like laid out next to each other. And for right now, we're just kind of focused on our KYB one that we have here. So similar to the other ones, we have 2 sets of valving. On this one, we have our base valve compression shims right here. And these all come stock with what's called a subvalve. So this also features some valving on the subvalve as well. Again, this shim stack here controls the majority of your compression damping. Your subvalve is going to help contribute to that. These are the slots that the oil is going to enter to flow through in order to bend these shims and have them deflect open as such. Now the key takeaway is since this piston is bigger in diameter, the oil has more leverage because think this is our center point. From our center to the outside of the circle, so let's go with our radius, it has a longer distance. So because of that, we have a lot more leverage we can apply on these shims to help these shims deflect open and allow oil to bypass. Also, this long piece right here that the shim's covering, that's a lot more area for the oil to flow through as well. So on this, we can see that there's quite a bit more shims on this setup than what we saw on the WP setup. Just because of that doesn't exactly mean this setup is going to be stiffer. It just means due to the physics of this setup, it requires more shims in order to maybe yield the same effect. Now let's take a look at the Showa setup, and we can see that that one is even bigger. And let's break down this one. So again, we have our base valve compression shims right here. We installed our JBI subvalve on this one. This one did not feature a subvalve from the factory. So we have some subvalve shims on here. Again, this does the majority of our compression damping, and the subvalve helps complement that damping as well. Let's take a look at what this piston geometry looks like. Here's the piston right next to it. Now what you're seeing is the backside, what the shims cover. So that's going to be this side of the piston. So typically, that is covered with a shim, such as that. But let's flick it around so you guys can see the inside and see what the oil sees. So again, the oil is going to find its way through one of these passages, and it's going to apply pressure to the shim and allow the shim to deflect open. Now with this being the largest diameter piston, again from our center point out, this is the longest radius distance, it's going to have the most leverage that it can apply on the shim. So more leverage, meaning the easier it is for the oil to deflect the shim open. Also, if you look at this area and how long it is, that is a lot of area for the oil to flow through once this begins to once this begins to bend and flex open. Oftentimes, people look at the total port geometry or the design, and they think oil is flowing throughout the entire port. That may happen at very high-speed applications, meaning like very big jump landings, but typically you're not going to get much oil flow in the lower part region of the fork. Again, because when pressure gets applied, the shim is going to bend away. Let's try to make it so you guys can see it. Like this. So the more the shim deflects, the harder it is to open. So it's very hard to get the shim to open enough for oil to flow through here. But again, what happens is once the shim starts flexing open, the pressure begins to drop drastically. And in response, the shim begins to close back. So again, this is largely influenced by our clicker setting we have here. The farther your clicker setting is in, so meaning the lower the number, the sooner the oil is going to be forced to go through the valving. The higher the compression number you have, meaning the more this is backed out counterclockwise, the more oil can bypass through our center valve and come through our subvalve or the standard compression post. So now we've checked that out. Let's take a look at the mid-valve assembly and see what that looks like inside of a KYB fork. Now I just have one out of a KYB fork because if I showed you one out of the Showa fork, it's going to look largely similar. This is out of a newer KYB fork. This mid-piston diameter is 25 millimeters, which is identical to the Showa mid-piston diameter of 25 millimeters. There's still some KYB forks out there that have a 24 millimeter piston, so it's just a hair smaller. Between the two, there's not too much difference. So let's break down what shim stack is which and what they do. On the very top, we have our rebound shim stack. That does all of our rebound damping. And on the bottom, we have our compression shim stack. And that contributes our mid to high speed compression damping. And then under some circumstances, it can apply some low speed compression damping as well, depending on the shim configuration that is here. Earlier, we looked at what's called the WP cone valve setup. This is called KYB's leaf spring shim setup. So instead of a spring being underneath the shims, instead there is another shim stack, which is probably hard for you guys to see, but it acts as a leaf spring. Think of that as the leaf spring system you often see on cars. So as this compresses and moves this way, the oil is going to move this direction. It'll find its way through these intake ports, and let's follow that port. That port is covered by this shim right here. I'm going to stick my tool in here. I can't. And it's going to cause these shims to bend open like this. Now, two things are going to happen here, depending on the force. First, the shims are going to bend open. Secondly, the leaf spring shims at the bottom are going to deflect down, allowing the entire shim stack to lift away. And that's going to create a lot of air very quickly. The stiffer our mid-valve compression setting is, the sooner it's going to provide compression damping. And by soon, I don't mean in the position of travel. So it doesn't mean when the fork is at the top of the stroke, it means at lower speeds. And by lower speeds, that's going to be when your wheel first encounters small to medium-sized bumps. On the track, that's going to be braking bumps as you go in to a corner and come out of a corner. On the trail, that's going to be small bumps, rocks, roots, and any other trail trash you're going to find out while on the trail. There is another style of KYB mid-valve that is not what's called a leaf spring. Instead, we have a shim stack here, and there's going to be a small coil spring underneath it. It works relatively the same. It just has a slightly different order of operations. By that, I mean, when the oil flows this way, first the shims are going to deflect away vertically. They're going to lift, and then the shims are going to bend. Whereas with this setup, first the shims bend, and then they deflect away vertically. That order of operations may sound very small and not like a big change, but it has a huge impact over how the bike rides. Leaf spring setups tend to provide you with good ride height at all times, regardless of how soft or stiff of a setting you have. But they tend to be more complicated to set up as well. At Ride JBI, we've taken a big liking to these leaf spring style setups. It has taken some time to figure out some good settings, but in comparison to the previous style mid-valve, which has been out for about 15 years, These ones have only been out for about 7 years. So understandably, it's taken us a little bit of time to perfect our settings on this. But once we have, we've gotten much better settings than before. Earlier, we talked about how clickers can only achieve so much. With valving, we have many opportunities to adjust the valving. An easy way to do that is we can add or remove shims. So if we add shims here, or if we add shims in the mid-valve compression area, that is going to make it harder for the oil to flow through. If we reduce shims, then there's going to be less resistance for the shims to bend open, allowing oil to bypass. There's a few other valving configurations, but we'll get to that in another episode. The same concept applies to our rebound. The more shims that we apply, the more difficult it will be for these shims to deflect open. The less shims we have there, the easier it will be to deflect open. One analogy I like a lot is thinking of a door. If you're at the front door of somebody's house and the door is closed, think of your shim stack as being closed at all times. The amount of effort it takes to open that door is going to be based on how many shims you have. And then how far you can open that door is likely going to be contributed by the last shim in this shim stack, which we call the clamping shim. So effectively, we can control how easy it is to open said shim stack, aka door, and then how far that door or shim stack can open. We have found that the best performing suspension is something that is very seamless. So meaning the oil has many different paths for it to flow through, depending on how much pressure is generated inside of the fork cartridge or shock absorber. So at very low speeds or low pressures, the oil has a very easy path to flow through. And then as that pressure builds up, it has alternative paths to go through. And there's never a big change or there's not a big difference in how much pressure has to be applied to open the next door. So think of it as going up a set of stairs, and each stair has the same height and step back on it, compared to, say, the first stair being really tall and the next stairs being very short. That wouldn't be a very seamless transition. So with valving, we want to make sure that each path the oil can flow through, it has a very seamless transition as it goes through our different valving options. Let's oversimplify here, but for our off-road applications, it's going to be not too many shims at all. There'll still be some, but just a few. That's going to provide a rather soft and flush setting. For our motocross settings, we're going to have an even stiffer base valve and even stiffer mid valve. That's going to ensure that the fork has good hold up at all times when you ride and has good bottoming resistance. And then when you get into our even stiffer applications, we're going to add about 3 times the amount of shims in our base valve and our mid valve compared to our moto setting for the riding such as supercross, arena cross, or freestyle motocross. There's quite a big departure going from off-road motocross riding to the freestyle, supercross, and arena cross applications. Whereas going from a motocross setting to an off-road setting, there is a difference in the valving, but the jump is not that great.